Hey everybody, it's time for JL's Why Isn't JL Doing Comedy in this comedy video of the week. If you don't like these, that's okay. It's a free video on the internet. You certainly don't have to let me know about it. Now I'm sure you will. But I have a few things comedic to talk about at the end of this. So if you're interested in where I perform, how I make money, seeing me live, whether I live or die, those kind of things, wait till the end of the video. And the podcast, these videos for the last few months have been sort of mini replacements for my podcast, Rain on Your Parade, which will be coming back in a week or two at the latest. Upgrades in equipment, possibly doing multiple episodes a week, talking to some behind the scenes producers. So I hope it comes back at least as good, if not, and I know this might be sacrilegious to how good the show was, but maybe even better, though I don't want to say that. I don't want to promise better. I want to promise hopefully as good. But we'll get to that at the end. But the reason for this video today is I see a lot of people talking about the constitutional crisis that we're going through, and we are. This man Garcia, I forget his first name, apologies, but who is right now presumably rotting in an El Salvador prison. If rotting is the best, possibly being victimized, who knows? We have no idea. But Donald Trump and his administration have done sort of a 180. They briefly admitted a flaw and guilt in terms of accidentally sending him abroad. They've now done a 180 and are like, no, Stephen Miller says it's totally okay. So we're going to ignore our briefs to the Supreme Court. We're going to ignore everything else and just say, yeah, no mistake, no harm, no foul, even though there's tremendous harm being done. And the, crypto nightclub bro dictator running El Salvador, Bukele, is saying, no, of course we won't return him. And Donald Trump, who loves to flex power on everyone, everywhere, is putting his hands up going, well, we can't, I guess we can't do anything because this 5'5" nightclub owner says he won't return it. And who are we to fight El Salvador, the United States? No, that we could never beat them. So it's sort of a pathetic but vile sort of capitulation to just like, oh, mistakes were made, but fuck this guy, basically, wherever he is. I have a sad theory that maybe this person has been harmed or is harmed or worse. I have no evidence of that, but it seems odd that both presidents are like, nope, can't do anything about it. Too bad. But what I'm seeing from this is with people calling it a constitutional crisis, and it is in the fact that the Supreme Court has been fairly clear. And I guess like Brown versus Board of Education, they might have to issue a second decision to make it clear, like, hey, Trump administration, you should do some things with all deliberate speed. And I think that's a fitting metaphor for this, the sort of civil rights era, because it seems like immigrants are sort of, and this may, to people who know their basic constitutional law, maybe this seems like hyperbole, but I don't think it is. Immigrants to Trump basically seem like Dred Scott. Now that's an 1857 landmark decision, widely hailed as like the worst decision in Supreme Court history, and there have been some bad ones, where basically, black people in America, at the time, obviously mostly slaves, but had no rights. I forget the exact phrasing, but no words worthy of respect or that whatever you can quote it in the comments if you want. But the point is, it basically said black people in America had no rights that the white man had to respect. And it seems that Trump has taken that approach with immigrants in terms of they're not worthy of due process, even though they are owed due process. When mistakes are made, they are not worthy of rectifying those mistakes, no matter how heinous those mistakes are. And it seems like Trump, in quote unquote jokes with Bukele, was suggesting maybe we could send American citizens, only the really bad ones, but maybe we could send them to El Salvador too. So this isn't so much a slippery slope as it is a MAGA cliff that Donald Trump wants America to jump off of. And I feel like at this point, it's one of those things, this country has lost sight. So many people have lost sight of its ideals and principles, which are really what are supposed to make America, America. When people say America is an idea, it is, but to most people now, I think America looks a certain way, stands for certain things, but mostly it's the tangible things. It's, I want to feel comfortable and safe, no matter what it costs other people. I want eggs cheap, no matter what it costs other people. I want my economics to be good, no matter what it costs other people. So it's a very tangible, selfish sort of ideology that's replaced what was the American ideal. And we've seen it. We've seen generational sacrifice throughout the decades and centuries in this country, but we're not that country anymore. And it's very sad to see. But that the fact that, you know, yes, we are at a constitutional crisis because he is refusing to sort of basically obey. He's not confronting the Supreme Court yet, but he's basically just going like, I don't know what to do. I don't know if we can do anything. And I think that is bad, but I do still think that the constitutional crisis began in January of 2021. The founders, as bad as and flawed as they were in many ways, I think never envisioned the American people sort of just signing on to a blatant, horrible man and criminal like Trump. Now, yes, some of the founders were slave owners, and I still maintain, I've said this in my act, I do believe that Donald Trump, if he had been a founding father, God help us, if he had been a founding father, he would have been the worst of the slave-owning founding fathers. He wouldn't have just owned slaves. He would have been the guy mocking George Washington for, trying to keep slave families together. He would have been like, but George, that's the whole fun of it. The whole fun of sort of having slaves is when you get to drink their liberal slave tears when you separate the families. Why would you deny yourself that special pleasure? I genuinely believe he would always be the worst person in the room, no matter what generation. His core is just a race to the bottom. So whether it's the 1790s or the 2020s, he's always going to be the worst human being in the room. All due respect to how he made Bill Maher feel all good inside. And I say the founders, they gave a mechanism. They didn't think Americans would just out and out elect a criminal and a traitor, basically. So in 2021, on January 6th, that was a chance for the Senate to basically say, okay, we're the last line of defense. We're the defense that the founders envisioned to stop someone like Donald Trump from taking office. And only 7 Republicans voted to do so. The rest were complete cowards, and including Mitch McConnell, who's trying to find his political obituary has basically already been written, and yet he's now trying to find, with nominees, he's been trying to find some deathbed confessional sort of forgiveness maybe for what he enabled. But they never envisioned this, and I think when the Senate didn't convict Trump, they led us to what I call a dormant constitutional crisis. Yes, I'm flexing my Tom Friedman style. Please let that become a phrase that scholars quote. But basically, by not taking Trump out metaphorically when it was completely constitutionally sort of almost required, they allowed his movement and his political career to live dormant until a moment like 2024 when he could rise again. And that was the constitutional crisis to me has been 4 years running. And it only now has become sort of, instead of dormant, it's now active. And I think we are a country which, unfortunately, a country that believed in its ideals wouldn't have Trump reelected. And a country that believed in its ideals wouldn't allow an immigrant due process who a court has said the law has said cannot be sent back to El Salvador. So Trump is violating spirit and letter of law and the Constitution, basically, to do what he wants and to try to test once again the guardrails, which seem to be non-existent now. And I think our country too many people in our country seem willing to capitulate to that and say, well, you know what? It's just some guy who shouldn't have been in the country. So what? And we haven't learned our lessons. That old Holocaust poem, they came for so-and-so and I said nothing. They came for so-and-so, I said nothing. And then they came for me and there was nobody left to speak up for me. If we can allow this, and this is one of those things where I would say, I'm usually not for performative protest or action. I know maybe that makes me more cynical than I'd like to be at this point in my life. But this is a time where I think, you know what? I don't care if it's a losing issue. And maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But Democrats, once again, are America's single mom. They're left having to do what's best for people and, conservatives will portray that as some sort of paternalistic, they think they know better than you, elitist coding. But really, somebody's got to defend the Constitution at some point. Not psychos on Twitter who identify as constitutional conservatives and don't know the first thing about the Constitution, similarly to their opinions on Scripture. But at some point, you've got to stand up for things like this. And I'm okay with just filibustering whatever until something is done on this guy, because this idea, like, if we're willing to sell this guy out when the administration has admitted they're wrong and it flies in the face of law and the Constitution, then we don't really stand for anything in this country. That's why test cases in the Supreme Court are always the worst of the worst, because if it applies to the worst of the worst, and this guy's not the worst of the worst, I'm not implying that, but when our case law applies to the worst of the worst, then it applies to the best of us also. But if something applies to the best of us, then we can always hedge and say, yeah, but that guy's really bad or that woman's really bad, so the law or the Constitution doesn't need to apply to them. And I think what this country is routinely saying is, no, I don't. Like Tom Homan, Uncle Fester, the guy running Homeland Security for Trump, he had said, when somebody brought up due process, he said that, that id, that sort of visceral average American response, which I'm not saying is wrong to have. He said, what about Lake and Riley? He mentioned victims of immigrant violence. He said, where was their due process? Yes, of course. Like, that's terrible what happened to them. But our government doesn't run on sort of a John Wick approach to criminal justice. It aims for higher ideals and for a system that can sustain itself on principles higher than just sort of gut instinct vengeance. And I don't blame individuals for having those feelings, but our government is supposed to be better than that. It's supposed to reach for higher ideals and apply to not just perfectly behaved human beings, but sometimes people who aren't. And even if you are an immigrant in this country illegally, you still are owed certain due process rights. And Trump and Tom Homan and Stephen Miller and this whole sort of horrible group of people, they're banking on Americans no longer really caring about that. As if their goods can become cheaper, if they can weather, the tariff storm and know that people who don't look like them are being swept off the street, they can feel safe. We're supposed to be better than that. And I hope that Democrats, and I'm more of a champion for Democrats than a lot of people, I think, on social media and in left-wing spaces. But this is the kind of thing it is worth, I think, fighting for and saying, no, we're not going to do this, we're not going to do that until this is addressed. And yes, standing up for rule of law and constitutional principles. The American people didn't do it in the November 2024 election. We are the mob. We are like in Gladiator. We are the mob. But politicians owe a higher duty than just mere self-interest. They take an oath to the Constitution, and that oath is worthless. And it seems worthless already to Republicans, but that oath is worthless to everybody if something like this is not worth taking a stand and just drawing a red line and saying there will be no more business done until this is addressed. Because if this isn't addressed, then all this other stuff we're doing is bullshit of convenience. We're no longer a nation that stands on any principles and respects rule of law. So I know this was a little long-winded. Sorry about that, but I also was seeing, you may have stopped listening already, or watching, but this is obviously for my podcast fans as well. But also what he's demanding of Harvard University, that's like the flip side of this. One side is to say Americans don't really care about people who are different from them, and if they feel like they can still be safe, you can have your way with immigrants or lesser thans in their minds. But the other flip is the resentment of elites. So he's going after Harvard University. He suspended, I think, $2.2 billion worth of funds for Harvard. But reading what they want to do with some of these Ivy League schools, it's very telling once again. Now they can wield, it's either you're less than or you're better than. So they're aiming that that bottom 10%, and I only mean bottom 10% in the viewpoint, not that immigrants are bottom, obviously. I'm just saying from the average sort of conservative or MAGA mind, you can go after the immigrants because that ain't me. I don't care about their due process. And you can go after the Harvard elites and the Columbia students because I don't agree with them and I'm never going to an Ivy League school anyway, so fuck them too. But it's very interesting that he's basically doing what amount to like consent decrees for Ivy League schools. And yet when police departments are shown to be, murdering en masse or abusing en masse populations of color, those, just like Jeff Sessions abandoned a consent decree, I forget if it was for Baltimore when the first Trump administration started. So when you have real violence against people of color by police departments, Trump will not stand by invasive consent decrees. He wants the handcuffs off law enforcement at all times for all reasons. That's why they were so bold as to suggest to him, some commentators, that he should pardon Dred Chauvin, because there is no shame and there is no sort of just baseline decency or humanity when it comes to certain groups. And those certain groups are basically a majority of America, and it's immigrants and people of color and women, etc. But when it comes to Ivy League institutions, invasive consent decrees demanding just like the most piercing, invasive look into every aspect of a university, they're totally okay with that for, protests against, and don't get me wrong, don't do the thing, well, but what anti-Semitism? Of course. But it just stands, if you can, and I'm not even doing whataboutism, I'm saying consent decrees for police departments that have abused and killed people of color, not okay. But universities experiencing some hate, some turmoil, are worthy of just the most invasive, restrictive covenants with the federal government. It doesn't make sense unless you realize that this is a government running right now on antebellum principles of what America should be, and a resentment of both those who are different and those who are possibly achieving more. Whether it's Ivy League students or humble immigrants or any number of categories. That's what this administration stands for. And I do think this is one of those times where I think that Democrats should put a cease to business of governing, because this is that important, I believe. It's not that this one man is so important, but what he represents, the end of rule of law, the respect for our courts and our Supreme Court decisions, it is that important. That's what this is about. So this was long, but think of it as like a mini podcast episode. But yeah, it's this is worth a fight. This is worth halting government, as far as I'm concerned, because to let this, and just a note on Bukele in El Salvador, as a man who is half Haitian, I know you were saying Big Adam Sandler is half Haitian. It's true. When you mixed Haitian dad and super Irish mom, you get this. I can understand people of El Salvador, I wouldn't say enjoying, but responding to an effective strongman. Because in some of these countries, many of which have been historically damaged by the United States foreign policy, let's not talk about that, of course, because once you start talking about the past and reforming errors made in the past, you start to hear words like reparations or damages, and then, oh boy, that opens up a whole can of worms that this country will most likely never be prepared to deal with. But I can see, in terms of how awful things are right now in Haiti, I could, if you could rub a genie lamp and say, I would like a benevolent strongman like Maximus from Gladiator, somebody trusted to reform the country and then hand it over to properly democratically elected people. I think Haiti would probably respond to a strongman as well, but they've had so many bad ones. And I think the power that strongmen get is so corrupting and enticing that even if somebody comes benevolently at first, it often almost invariably corrupts them. So I get why El Salvador, with all their troubles that they've been having, it responded to a guy who just was basically like, no, we're shutting this down. If some innocent people get caught, I'm banking on my country being okay with that. I think in a country like Haiti, there are times where I think that may be what Haiti needs, unfortunately. But with America being the, sort of shining city on a hill, hardy har har, we don't operate that way. Our democracy used to be, in principle and often in practice, the envy, because we were combining sort of strength with respect for process and rights. And it seems that Trump, even more so than a Putin, I think he sees Bukele as a model of what he wants, which is, as long as most people agree with me, I can shit on people who are different. I can treat criminals without due process. I can even treat just suspicious people without due process. And I think most people will back me because the era of American ideals is over, and the America of raw power and fuck you if you're not like me is what I think most people want. And if it is what most people want, then this country is, headed down the tubes. But if it's not, it's going to be up to Democrats to say, this is a point we cannot pass. It's not about this one man, though it is in part about this one man. It's about the slippery slope becoming a goddamn cliff that we're not going to go over because we took an oath and we uphold that oath above even the whims of the people and certainly the mendacity of the MAGA movement. All right, that's this week's video. Comedy, you're not even listening anymore, but comedy. I'm headed back to Canada, Ontario, May 29th. Please show up there. Get tickets now on my website, Yuck Yucks Ontario. And also May 2nd, I'm in Long Island, where I got banned from a bunch of clubs because some very pro-comedy, free speech warriors did some cancel culture on me for 5 minutes of Trump jokes. They complained to management, and now I don't work clubs that I worked for over a decade. So I'm at the Loft in Belmore, Long Island, May 2nd, 8 p.m. Tickets on my website. If you're in New York City, it's accessible by public transportation. That's how I'll be getting there on the LIRR. And if you're in Long Island or have friends or family in Long Island, please spread the word, get the tickets on my website. More of a point of personal pride that I want to sell tickets on Long Island now that I have to do independent venues. Okay, sorry if this was too long for you. Just remember, I keep telling you, this is more like a mini podcast this week as I'm gearing up to bring the podcast back. So, I hope you liked this, and I hope you maybe check out the podcast. Rain on Your Parade is up on all audio platforms, and it's on my YouTube channel. And it's coming back in a couple of weeks, so you can catch up now on a lot of great episodes. And if not, well, thanks for watching this video if you're still watching now, which you're not. Bye.